The main reason, I guess, for doing this was obviously because there's been a lot of loss around for a lot of people in a lot of different ways and different shapes and forms. Yeah, so it was really just to kind of create a space for us where we can come together and discuss that, especially when everybody is by themselves. And maybe, I don't know how many people are having these conversations, but I personally know a few people who have had like people in their families pass away because of the virus. So I think that for me kind of really hit home, and I thought, okay, actually there's probably a lot of people that are experiencing some kind of loss, so let's just put this out there and see if people can take something away that would be helpful for them.
Hey, salam everyone. I am Dr. Anjabeen Ashraf, and I'm a mental health professional located in the United States in Oregon. And as I've been working with clients, I'm seeing this grieving happening as we lose this sense of normalcy, whatever normal looked like for us, the ability to move with relative ease through our communities and our lives. And also I want to really recognize, and we're going to talk about this, is that for some of us, we had more ease than others even before this, and that you know is what happens at the intersections of different identities. But certainly I think as a global community we are really facing real hardships right now, and a lot of that is resulting in mental, emotional, and spiritual challenges, which we hope to create a space to sit in and name and heal with each other today. So I thank everyone for being here.
And I'm Maliha. I'm a licensed mental health professional in Houston, Texas, USA. Kind of what Dr. Ashraf mentioned, there's so much that has changed in our lives in a matter of only a few weeks and months. I feel like our daily routines, our way of living has essentially been shaken to its core. Our routines, our rituals, things that brought us to normalcy, they've completely changed. And I think our routines provide us a sense of who we are. They kind of create our identity in some ways. And when that happens, we feel a loss of ourselves. And that's why this time is especially difficult for people. I've been talking with my clients and they're talking about that sense of loss that they're experiencing. It's very difficult. And just like you said, people feel it at different degrees, but I think together we are feeling a collective sense of grief, right? We've lost our ability to have meals together, to be able to go to our favorite coffee shop, to have physical connection with people, to be able to worship together. Today was Friday and we weren't able to go to the masjid to do the Friday prayer. People have lost their jobs, and that impacts our sense of security and stability. And then, you know, we're not able to be with our loved ones who are sick right now. We're not able to visit with them the way that we used to be able to do. And like Dr. Sadiq mentioned, that there are a lot of people who have lost their loved ones to COVID-19. And I think it's especially different time for us because we're not able to attend funerals and we're not able to honor and reflect on our purpose the way that we would have been able to before. So I think with all this loss and all this change, we feel this heaviness in our hearts. And I think it's important to name that as grief because we're all experiencing it. I think we're grieving the world that we knew, or the life as we knew it, essentially.
Yeah, I think especially because, like you mentioned, so much has changed and it hasn't been in our control. We've just sort of, this thing has happened and it's come out of nowhere and everyone's lives have had to adjust. And I think especially with like the days, for me, I know the days just seem to merge into one because there is that loss of structure, loss of a kind of routine. And especially with work and employment, I know a lot of us are still working from home, but for many people that sense of security and structure that they get, and purpose even, from leaving their homes, going to work, coming back, like all of that has it's like when a foundation has just been kind of shaken. Yeah, and I have had clients who have been worrying about that because it's uncertain. The end of this is uncertain as well. There's a lot of unknowns with it, which can be really difficult to sit with, especially if we were already feeling anxious prior to this, or if we were already feeling maybe a bit worried about the future and things like that, and then all of a sudden this has happened. And for many people, I guess it might feel like a confirmation of some of their worries, but actually this time can then help us to reframe how we're looking at like our control or our sense of security, our sense of purpose, and thinking about actually where, now that all this has happened, where can we find that?
Right. I think what you mentioned, that anxiety that we feel, I feel like that's anxiety mixed with this type of grief, anticipatory grief of, what's going to happen, what's the worst case scenario that's going to take place. So if we're worried about our parents who might be elderly, we might worry, well, what if they die? Or we might worry about losing our jobs if we have them right now. We may be worried about our being able to pay our house mortgage. So I think our brains are very, very good at imagining and coming up with all of these worst case scenarios. And I think we do that as a way to protect ourselves because it helps us kind of think through that. And I think right now, though, it can take an unhealthy turn because it adds to all of that loss and the change. It adds to that grief that we're experiencing.
Yeah.
I often, excuse me, I often talk with clients about our brain kind of scanning the future to look for danger. And sometimes that's good. That's an evolutionary adaptation that we have as humans, and it's what's kept us alive and going and thriving as a species. And sometimes it becomes maladaptive. So that means it's not helpful anymore. And literally our brain is trying to figure out a solution to a problem that we cannot, because none of us can predict the future. Right. And Maliha, you talked about anticipatory grief. There's been a lot of conversation about this, about I don't know what's going to happen. There's a lot of uncertainty. Will I be grieving my job loss? Will I be grieving a person passing away that I know? And for me, working with lots of folks of color, it's been a recognition that they've been feeling this way for a long time. And now this current situation is really compounding that, right? So again, going back to this is affecting all of us kind of at different levels because of what our identities and how those identities interacted with systems already. And then now to add this on, who of us are more ready to deal with this and manage it in ways that we can. And again, bringing it back to what we can control is really important, because our anxiety tries to control stuff that it literally cannot, right? We cannot control the outcome. We cannot control the future. And so I know that bringing it back to what we can control is really important in the work that I've been doing with all my clients in the past 2 weeks.
Right. And I think that's a thing that we learn when we're exploring what we are going through. We kind of talked about this a little bit, about naming what we're experiencing, right? Because I think who wouldn't feel, with the state of that the world is in right now, who wouldn't feel overwhelmed or distressed, right? So I think it's a very normal thing for us to feel that anxiety or that grief. If we're able to name that discomfort, we're able to find relief within it. By naming our grief, we're able to provide ourselves some space so that we can grow from it. So we're able to sit with our sadness. And I know when we think about that, we think, why would I want to feel sad? I don't want to feel sad. I want to run away from sadness. And the thing is, with our emotions, they need to be expressed. We need to feel them for us to heal from them. It's like this concept of our emotions need motion. So we need to be able to move through them rather than suppressing them. I often tell my clients who struggle with expressing their emotions, it's to think of it like shaking a can of Coke. So every time you're suppressing your emotion, that's one shake. You feel anger, you suppress that, that's another shake. You feel sadness, you suppress that, that's another shake. Eventually, when you try to go open that can of Coke, it explodes. And that's something that happens when we try to suppress our emotions. They come out in unhealthy ways. So it's healthier for us to let off that pressure a little bit slowly and be able to kind of move through what we're experiencing rather than just pushing it all inside.
Yeah, I guess it can be very scary, because grief, wherever it's coming from, it's a response to a loss that we've had, and and that can be huge. I know there's the severity and intensity of the grief that we experience can depend on what the thing is that we've lost, or who the person is, or what the relationship was. But to sit down and face it it is really scary, because the emotion is a really difficult one. And I know with myself, when I'm working with grief with clients as well, it can be really difficult, because there's no protocols, there's no sort of, okay, this is what you do so that you don't feel grief. Or obviously with depression and anxiety, there are certain things that people can implement in their life to kind of process and go through that. But with grief, it's a very big, heavy kind of emotion, and there's no time scale. There's no one thing that you can do that will kind of make it easier. I mean, there's ways that you can manage grief in a healthy way, but yeah, it takes its time. It runs its own course. But I think it's also really important to be able to identify what that emotion is, because sometimes we can be experiencing grief and not know that it's grief, and it can come with a lot of different emotions as well. So if we have experienced a loss and we might be feeling anger, we might be in denial, or we might be feeling upset, and we might be feeling guilty even. And all of these can be different parts of the whole experience of grief. So I think, yeah, it's really important what you said about being able to name the emotion, because then you know what it is, and I guess it gives some kind of assurance that, okay, this is grief, and it's gonna take time.
Yeah, I think you talked about that sense of feeling anger or feeling that denial. There are some patterns that we see when people grieve, and of course everyone's different, so they experience things differently, but commonly we see that people will go through these phases or stages. And I think it's important to keep in mind when we talk about this that we will experience one stage, we might go to the next one, and then we might come back to it, just depending on who we are, what our life experiences have been. But one of the first ones, just like you said, it's denial. And I often find myself feeling that right now. Waking up in the morning thinking about, is this really happening right now? You go outside, if you go for a drive, you might see your favorite restaurant and it's deserted. And it feels like a shock every time, right? Am I really going through this? Is this really what's happening in the world right now? So I feel like a lot of us experience that. And then we also might feel that anger. We might feel upset with the lack of resources. We might feel upset with not our loved ones not being able to get the care that they need. One of my best friends has COVID-19, and unfortunately she's at home and she's having a really difficult time and not able to get the care that she would probably get outside of the situation. And I understand, of course, it's because we have to take care of people who are in more severe conditions. But we might feel that anger. We might feel frustration with, oh, I wish things could be better, And just like you said, if we're able to name that or identify those stages that's what we're experiencing, then it's, rather than being frustrated with ourselves about experiencing those, I think we can give ourselves more leeway and recognize, okay, I'm grieving right now, so I'm going to let myself have some space to experience that.
Yeah, I think what's coming up for me when you're talking about it is that compassion. Like, okay, this is grief. This is how I'm experiencing it, and it will look different on different days as well. And not everyone will go through the stages. Some people will actually maybe might just experience a little bit of emotion and then kind of just adapt to life. Yeah, so it's really important to have that compassion that, okay, this is what's going on, and it's a huge change that's happened, and there is so much loss that has happened, that actually it's okay if we do have a moment where we're feeling angry with things, or we're feeling frustrated because we're in financial insecurity or something.
Yeah, I think as you all were talking, I was thinking about the role that acceptance can play in allowing ourselves to feel our feelings. And this is part of that grief model, which is more fluid now than it was in the past. It's not so regimented and stage-like. We move in and out of those stages kind of fluidly based on who we are, our own unique experiences, and what that grief meant to us. But certainly all of us at a certain point have to accept that things have changed. And if we lose a loved one, it's accepting that they're no longer around. In the context of COVID, it's accepting that things are really confusing. Things are really scary. Things are really uncertain, right? And so I want to bring to everybody the concept of radical acceptance. And this is not, when I say accept, I don't mean we condone what's happening, we don't agree with it. It just means that we stop fighting it. And what that allows us to do is exactly what you all are talking about is I've accepted that things are uncertain, that I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day. And so now I have all this energy back, instead of fighting it, to name my feelings, to understand what I'm going through, to be able to express that, to take that energy and turn it back into myself as self-compassion. And I think acceptance is really key, because what I often hear from people is when they're going through the grieving process is it feels like this grief will engulf me. If I let myself feel it, I'm done. I'm useless to the world. I'm not going to be able to come back from this. And the reality is, if we let ourselves feel what we need to feel, there are going to be moments when it's going to feel really overwhelming and scary, especially if we're not used to feeling our feelings. But if we come at it from the acceptance lens, we just accept it as it is instead of trying to change it. In other words, I'm feeling overwhelmed right now, so I'm going to go over there and, I don't know, distract myself and do my best to not feel these feelings, right? But as Maliha said, it's going to come back around. It's like a boomerang. It's going to come back around at some point, and it might come back at a moment where it's not the best moment for it to kind of come out. And so I think it's in our best interest to just sit with the feelings, use that self-compassion, accept, take that energy back from fighting the situation, and put it towards our healing and working through the complicated emotions that we're all experiencing right now.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a great thing about just sitting with our feelings rather than trying to run away from them. I encourage my clients, and I do this myself, I try to journal, and it doesn't have to be regularly, it doesn't have to be like a whole page, but just journaling about what you're going through, because that itself provides us a way to process what's going on within us, right? And that way we're better able to kind of notice our patterns and notice when we feel overwhelmed, so that we can kind of help ourselves come up with healthier ways of dealing with what's going on. And then again, it gives motion to our emotion, right? We're taking that emotion, that frustration, and we're putting that down on a piece of paper, and we're able to get that out. So it's not just stuck inside of us. It's not suppressed within us. It's moving from one place to the next. And at some point, I would encourage that we do reach out to get support, whether that's professional, whether that's through friends or family. I do think that there's power in verbalizing our experiencing. It's a very healing thing to do. But to start off, I think, journaling or maybe exercising when you're feeling frustrated, playing sports, those are all great ways to kind of get out what's stuck inside. And yeah, I would encourage people to eventually talk to somebody.
Yeah, I think with journaling as well, it can feel like a safe way to start off as well. It's something obviously that you can just do privately, nobody has to see what we're writing. We don't have to filter either. I think that's really important as well, because when we're talking to somebody, there might be that element of, okay, what's this person going to say? How are they going to respond? What will they think of what I'm telling them? And what if it's not kind of responded to in a way that we would have liked? So there are some risks there, but with journaling, it's just you and the paper, and you can just get it out, and it can help to actually give you a different perspective on things. And like you mentioned, just having that outlet where it's no longer like bottled up inside you. Because even though sometimes we might think, oh, actually, if I talk about it or if I share it, like it's going to show that I'm not dealing with it. But actually being able to either like write things out and eventually talk to people about it is actually healthy. It actually shows that, yeah, you are able to look at your emotions, and by doing that, you're allowing them to kind of move and kind of flow rather than getting stuck, like you mentioned. I think coming back to grief in the sense of like losing a person, not necessarily because of the virus. It could be other things. It could be if somebody's moved away. It could be like losing colleagues and things like that. But sometimes it can feel like, I guess, like somebody, sorry, I'm getting, okay. Like sometimes it can feel like an actual wound. Like, you know, when, if you imagine, like, if you have a Play-Doh and you've kind of made a shape of a person in Play-Doh, and then you get a cutter and you cut out a circle from that Play-Doh, obviously that Play-Doh person will now have a missing piece. So for me, that's kind of how I see grief, in the sense of when you've lost a person. And a lot of that, it does take time to adjust to that. But being able to talk to people about it, I know they do say, is one of the best ways that you can start to move through it, by being able to speak and verbalize. And it would have been nice, I guess, to hear from people and their experiences of loss and grief around this time. But I've got everybody on mute, but I think the chat box is open. If anybody did want to share anything.
I think that's such a beautiful way to depict what it really feels like to lose someone. Feeling like there's a part of ourselves or our life that's kind of missing. And there's so much healing in being able to share. I think our natural tendency, especially in our culture, is to not share what's going on, to push that aside, to ignore it because we don't want to talk about it. It's either too difficult to talk about, or it's maybe going to make other people uncomfortable. So there's a lot of barriers to healing for us. But if we can find that one confidant, whoever it is, or we can find a professional to speak with if that's what we're needing, I think those are great ways for us to start practicing being able to share what's really going on when we're experiencing grief. There's so much healing with connection. I think human beings are created as social creatures, and we need each other to survive. And right now it's difficult to do that because we have that barrier of physical distancing, right? We are experiencing our losses alone in our own homes, but I would encourage people to utilize video chats, Snapchat calling, Facebook Messenger. There's so many ways for us to stay connected. FaceTime, I have an Android phone, so for me, FaceTime doesn't really come to my mind first. But using all of those things to kind of stay connected with our loved ones, to create a sense of normalcy, and kind of remove some of those barriers. I think that's a very important thing for us to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, connection is so important. I'm glad you mentioned that, Maliha. And I think if, I'm working with clients right now who don't have a lot of connection. And so I'm encouraging them, now's the time, if we're ever going to try something outside of our comfort zone to get connected, now's the time to think about what are some really cool Facebook groups you can join? What are some really cool folks you can follow on Instagram and connect that way? Some meetup groups. I mean, we're not meeting up, but can certainly have a chat with people with like-minded interests, and we can connect that way. And also spaces like this are popping up more and more. I'm seeing more and more mental health professionals and just mental health advocates holding space for folks like this online. So engaging, even though it might feel a little scary to hop on a Zoom call with people you don't know, it can be really healing, even if we don't say anything, for other people to name what is happening. I think one thing I've been processing with a lot of my clients is that there's a sense of normalcy in that everyone's going through this together, right? And you and I, as mental health professionals, also call this normalizing, that, hey, you're not the only one. But often when we're going through sadness, we're going through grief, it makes us feel like we are the only one. I think this is one of those points in human history where we can say, no, actually, most of us are going through very similar things. And I think there's beauty in that. I wish we weren't all going through it. And since we are, there's beauty in that. This helps us to be a little softer, I think, to reach out for connection, knowing that the person next to me is probably experiencing something challenging in some kind of way. So I'm going to encourage people to get out your comfort zone and find a really neat Facebook group to join with shared interests, so that you don't feel as isolated right now, and you can have a place to voice your emotions and your feelings. And a plug for all of us mental health professionals. I always say this, I'm biased, but everyone should go see a mental health professional. All of us are pretty well versed at doing online counseling. It's different than in person, right? But it's what we have. It's a tool we're using right now, and it's the best we got. And it can be a really healing space. So if you've ever wondered about online counseling, I'm sure folks in your area would be willing to have a conversation with you about that.
Yeah, I definitely think this is a perfect time to utilize it, because
Mm-hmm.
obviously everybody is by themselves, like, and in their own homes as well. So actually, you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to go and meet a stranger in a place that you haven't been before or anything like that. So it's probably quite an easier way to do it when it's online in terms of practicality anyway. Yeah, there are a few things going through my mind actually when you were speaking. I don't think I can remember all of them now. But yeah, no, there was something about connection that you were saying actually. And when it comes to loss as well, often we might be quite hesitant to talk to people about the emotions that we're feeling, or when we feel that sense of loss. But actually the person that you're speaking to might even have a similar experience, that they might be actually grateful to you that, okay, I'm so glad that you brought this up, because this is what's been going on for me. And it can really kind of open doors. And that sense of feeling connected, when, especially in where we are today, is huge. And just to know that actually we're not alone in this, even though like physically we might be, but emotionally there's a lot of people that we can connect to.
Mm-hmm.
It's just taking that step and not overthinking things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think we also have to push through our uncomfortability with sharing or hearing other people share. Because I think what I find oftentimes in our community is that when we share, hey, I'm having a hard time, we're met with, well, look at the bright side, or look at all these things that we can be grateful for. And yes, I think we can be grateful and we can grieve at the same time, right? Oftentimes when that happens, when we try to fix the situation or try to push away what's someone else may be experiencing, it's usually because we ourselves have difficulty experiencing our emotions. So we're trying to fix it really quickly so we don't have to deal with it. So I think when someone shares with you, I think watching out for those kind of tendencies and letting them share. Because I think when we sit with someone in their emotions and we feel what they feel, that has more of a healing effect than when we try to offer advice or we try to fix things for them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's a learned skill, Maliha. I think we went to school to do that, right? And I wish we all had like a primer on how to listen, right? I call myself a trained listener. And so, I mean, simple things that I teach clients, especially couples, is just repeating back what you just heard. It's as simple as that, truly, y'all. Simple as like, Malia, I just heard you say you're sad. Can you tell me more about that, right? Or that sounds really hard. So it's really simple. I think people, like you said, Malia, are projecting their own stuff onto us. They have discomfort with their own emotions, and maybe they've never had someone hold space for them, so they don't know how to react when we reach out, and we're being vulnerable in that moment and expressing what we are feeling. Yeah. And I know that Dr. Sadiq, you wanted to end with the prayer. So I want to make sure we get to that. But I want to self-disclose and say, I'm a mental health professional. It does not mean I'm immune to any of the stuff we're talking about. It just means that I have skills that maybe I trot out a little easier, right? But I've been struggling through this too. It's been a massive change for me in the way that I navigate my life and my work. And I've had moments where I wasn't doing so great. And I'm disclosing that to humanize myself, that I'm not telling you all of this from a pedestal because I'm perfect. I'm human, and I might be on a different part of my journey, which is what I'm here to offer. But I'm also human. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I think that is really important because people maybe sometimes have a sense that, okay, maybe we have things a bit more put together, or like a bit more immune to experiencing the things that humans feel, but we are human as well, and we do go through these things. And there has been a lot on social media, I know, around like, okay, using this time to do things, and like, okay, it's a like seeing it as a change in a positive way, but actually there is a lot of difficult stuff that is coming with this. So I think it's important to that we also as professionals don't like polarize, and rather actually kind of stay in the middle and acknowledge that, okay, yeah, some days will be like this and some other days will be like this. Especially with, I know with myself and my work and my husband's work, and things have changed a lot, and it can be good to have a routine and to put things in place and to try and keep some sense of, like you guys have mentioned about the normalcy, but then also acknowledging that actually this is a very abnormal time that we're going through, and with that time it's going to throw up a lot of things that maybe we have pushed away in terms of like the emotions that we feel and things like that. So yeah, just knowing that there will be moments where we might feel like we're struggling, and that's fine. Like we all go through it.
Yeah, I think when I think about grief, we all want it to be like this linear process where it's just an upward slope. And I don't think life or even grief is like that. I think more it's more like waves, you know, and I think we try to push against those waves and we try to fight them. And it goes back to that concept of radical acceptance, radically accepting what is happening right now. How do we make the most of what we are kind of given? How do we find a way to live in this new normal? I think it goes back to that. And when we do that, it's rather than pushing against the waves, we're kind of moving with them. And that's what really is healing.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something really, again, coming back to that compassion, like just something really soft about that, like rather than forcing ourselves to push through things or to like put our blinders on to things, just actually being open and just realizing, like, okay, just noticing what you're feeling and just flowing with it, rather than like having expectations or putting pressure on ourselves to be a certain way, or to kind of, yeah, do things in a certain way, because we don't, that can often be counterproductive. But yeah, I think it does take a bit of practice and a bit of getting used to, and the more comfortable you feel with your emotions and just sitting with them, like you'll notice it, and you'll notice where you are with that as well. And it's just as well that actually this fell on a Friday, which feels quite nice that we're all here on a Friday doing something like collectively. If I can just invite you just to close your eyes just for the next 5 minutes or so, where I guess I will guide you kind of through a prayer where we can just ask for what we need at this time. So I think we might all be Muslim here, but if you're not, you can pray to whichever God or being that you follow. And really just take a moment just to connect with your heart. And just a moment to take in that silence that's around you and within you. Okay, dear God, I ask that you bless all of the people that are watching this, all of the people that are in this room together, that you give us serenity and peace in this time of uncertainty, that any losses that we have faced and any losses that anyone who is listening to this has faced, that you give them something better than what they have lost, and to give us strength and patience in knowing that everything that is happening right now has come from you. And forgive all of the people just grant us all forgiveness, all of the people who passed, whether to the virus or in other ways, everyone here who has maybe lost a person to forgive them, forgive their families, and all of the people who are working in the hospitals, in the pharmacies, all of the key workers, the care workers, to reward them for their efforts, and to make this a time that is uplifting in some ways and that brings us closer to you as well. And if you guys want to make a prayer yourself, just for anything, any losses that you might have experienced, anything that you want from God, or anything that you feel like you need in your life right now. And I'll finish by, okay, thank you, God, for allowing us to be in this space together, to share our feelings, to share experiences, to share our knowledge about the things that we might be going through, with the hope that it can be of benefit to those who are listening. Amen.